Truman saves Europe. That's what I'd like to talk about in today's history video. One of the most incredible things that an American president has ever done was what Harry Truman did in the 1940s to save Europe from going communist. At the end of World War II, as you know, the Russian armies kept moving and occupied all of Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, much of Austria, Bulgaria, Romania, and so on. And then they stayed there. And the result is that they became Russian satellites, communist governments. And it looked for a while like all of Europe was going to fall. In France, you had 25% of the people voting communist. In Italy, it was over 40% that voted communist. And there was a real possibility of communism taking over the absolute heart of Europe. And Truman moved decisively to head that off in three crucial ways. The first was that in 1946, he had his Secretary of State, George Marshall, give a speech announcing what came to be known as the Marshall Plan. It should really be called the Truman Plan, in which the United States gave huge amounts of economic aid to Western Europe. Now, it wasn't really aid. It was funds that were invested, but they were invested the way the Europeans wanted them to be. Uncle Sam just set up a line of credit for each country and said, you guys spend this as you want. You guys figure out what's best for your economy, and we'll pay the bill for it. Marshall Plan was huge, $13 billion. In terms of modern dollars relative to the GDP, it would be as if would equal the entire Social Security plus Medicare budget, or more than the entire defense budget of the United States. It would come to $700 or $800 billion in current money. It was 5% of the American economy. We just shipped over to Europe as foreign aid. And it was decisive. It helped Europe recover quickly and thoroughly. We offered it actually to Russia and to Eastern Europe, but they turned it down, and they never overcame the development lag as a result. Then the Russians decided that they were going to ban access to Berlin. Their excuse was that the United States, Britain, and France had consolidated their occupation zones in Germany to create what was called West Germany, and the Russians then created East Germany. And the Russians said, we're bound to keep access to Berlin open because of the Yalta Agreement, but East Germany wasn't a party to it, and now it's their decision. So East Germany closed the Autobahn, which meant we could not supply Berlin with food and fuel. Berlin was buried deep in the middle of Eastern Germany, but Berlin itself had an east and a west side. So the United States and Britain were cut off from supplying West Berlin with the food and the fuel that it needed. And everybody said this is going to cause a war. The U.S. is going to have no option but to shoot its way through the Autobahn to get to Berlin to supply it. Otherwise, they would starve and have to surrender. But then the Air Force came forward and said, nope, headed by Lucian Clay, who was an army general, and said, nope, we're going to supply West Berlin by air. And there then became the Berlin Airlift, where every 5 minutes a gigantic cargo plane took off from Belgium, flew to Berlin, landed, unloaded its supplies, took off and flew back. And this shuttle, involving thousands of airplanes, ran 24/7 for a period of several months, completely providing all of the food and the fuel Berlin needed. And a war was averted, Berlin was saved, and after a while the Russians backed down and reopened the Autobahn. And the third thing that happened was the Russians had developed satellite governments in Bulgaria and Romania and in Yugoslavia, and were threatening to move down the Balkan Peninsula to seize Greece and Turkey. And Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, where he said the United States would intervene militarily if we had to stop Greece and Turkey from going communist. Now, Greece had always been protected by Britain, but Britain announced it was too poor and too broke to be able to continue to do that, and the United States stepped in and said, we'll make sure that those countries are secure. So by blocking Stalin militarily in Greece and Turkey, and logistically in Berlin, and financially with the Marshall Plan, Truman saved Europe. Otherwise, we could have had a very different Cold War. It could have been Russia, China, and Europe against the United States, and we stopped that from happening. Harry Truman is probably the most underrated president we've ever had. Thanks for watching.